Good afternoon, and welcome to the Johns Hopkins 30-minute COVID-19 briefing, where we provide live insights from the experts who lead our work at the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center. For the next half hour, we'll focus on what you need to know right now about the COVID-19 pandemic and public health responses. As part of this briefing, we'll have an opportunity for live Q&A with our experts, and we'll be offering these 30-minute briefings regularly on Fridays at 12 p.m. I'm Dr. Lainie Rutkow, a professor in the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I'm part of the leadership team for the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center. We'll be providing answers in real time today, so please submit your questions in the box at the bottom of your screen. As always, there's much for us to discuss. I'm joined today by two of our experts. First, Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo is a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an associate professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Jennifer will give us an update about the public health implications of the COVID-19 data. Then we'll hear from Dr. Bill Moss, who is executive director of the Johns Hopkins International Vaccine Access Center and a professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Bill will give us an update about COVID-19 vaccines. I'll now turn to each of our experts for a brief overview. Jennifer, it seems like the numbers are continuing to go in the right direction for the most part. And as the weather improves and we head into spring, do you worry that we might be moving too quickly out of a very understandable desire to get back to normal?
Yes, thank you, Lainey. Where we are today is, of course, much better than where we were, a few months ago, particularly over the holiday period. The total number of cases being reported this week was under 400,000, 381,000 or so cases reported this week. Comparing that to what the highs were over the holiday period, where we saw, more than 1.5 million cases reported in some weeks. This is welcome. There are some, I think, concerns emerging in the data that we very much have to keep an eye on. For the most part, the majority of states, more than half of states are seeing fewer cases this week than they saw the week before. That's great. And at least 19 states have maintained that drop for 2 or more weeks. That is quite good news. But of course, attention is shifting to states where we may be seeing trends that are headed in the wrong direction. So there are about 25 states this week that have reported case increases from as compared with the week prior. Now, I always caution that we should not get too alarmed at a 1-week increase because case numbers fluctuate on a week-to-week basis. But when we see 2 or more weeks of case increases, that's when we start to worry a bit. And in fact, there are about 8 states where we have been seeing case increases for 2 or more weeks. So those are the places where we're going to look most closely at what's going on there. And of course, the worries are we have come so far in terms of starting to turn our epidemic around, and the rollout of vaccines continue at a very impressive pace, but we all have to remember that the majority of us are not yet protected, and so we remain vulnerable to infection and, unfortunately, to the potential for there to be another surge in cases. I very much hope not to see that, and I do have worries that as states are sort of rapidly reducing their public health restrictions, in some cases quite extensively, even repealing mask mandates, which in my view is very premature, we could be sending the wrong message and encouraging further spread. So, I don't want to paint too grim of a picture, but I have to stress the importance of staying the course and continuing to protect ourselves until the majority of us are vaccinated. In particular, with the potential for spring break travel and spring break gatherings, there is worry that we could see a spike in cases. That could be why we're seeing a spike in some of the states that we are seeing case increases. So it is obviously a worrisome situation potentially. The other thing that I remain concerned about is the decrease in testing. We talked about that last week, where in the last month, the number of tests being performed each day has decreased by now more than 20%. Last week it was 20%, but we are seeing the decreases continue. Obviously, infections are down, so there is fewer potential, a little bit of a lower need to test. However, this turn down in testing predates the decline in cases. And, it remains important that we make sure that we are not losing surveillance on the virus. We are not missing infections that are occurring, because there's always the worry that we could see silent spread that could then, come back in a quite obvious way in the weeks to come. So now is not the time to forget about testing. Understandable that attention has shifted to vaccines, but even as we're rolling out vaccines, testing remains essential. So if anyone is experiencing COVID-related symptoms, or if you've been exposed to a case and you're not vaccinated, you should very much seek out testing so that we can know for sure if you have the infection or not. Similarly, states, have a very tough job on their hands trying to both vaccinate their public as well as maintain testing. But it remains important that they continue to do both, and they continue to remind their constituents about the need for testing if they meet the criteria for it. There's also been some developments this week in terms of new federal guidance. Probably the biggest one that will be reported is it's being reported that today the CDC will issue, if they may have already issued at this moment, new guidelines regarding distancing in schools, and specifically may call for, instead of a very fixed reliance on 6 feet of distance between students, that perhaps 3 feet is sufficient. And this really follows some studies that have shown no difference in classroom transmission, whether 3 feet or 6 feet of distance was maintained, so long as other safety protocols are in place. This is, I think, important development. It puts the United States in greater alignment with recommendations for the WHO, which have talked about 1 meter of distance between students. And it also, I think, will help school districts begin to bring students back into the classroom, whereas before maintaining 6 feet of distance has made it difficult for them to bring all their students back in the confines of the physical space of the buildings. So I think this continues to underscore that schools can be resumed in person safely, provided safety protocols are in place, but that a fixed adherence to 6 foot distance may not be necessary.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Before I turn to Bill, I want to remind our audience to please submit any questions for Jennifer or Bill into the box at the bottom of your screen. Bill, it is certainly starting to feel like there's a meaningful uptick in availability and distribution of vaccines in the US, and a lot of folks are now talking about more extensive vaccine availability come May. Can you talk us through the latest developments?
Yes, thank you, Lainie. And it's been another really busy week in the COVID-19 vaccine world. I thought I'd start off with a different kind of feel-good story. The graphic writer Don Brown has this series of books, graphic nonfiction books, where the series is titled "Big Ideas That Change the World," and he just came out with a book called "A Shot in the Arm" that goes through, for a very broad audience and a very accessible way, the history of vaccination. And it just made me think that perhaps if more people kind of understood the history of vaccines and where we've kind of come from, this all started hundreds of years ago with giving people kind of smallpox virus and in kind of a managed way so that they would preferably have mild smallpox. And then we went to Edward Jenner's work on cowpox, where we gave people another type of virus to protect them against smallpox. So we've come a long way in the history of vaccine development. And I just wanted to call attention to that book, A Shot in the Arm, that may be useful for people who really don't have an understanding of vaccines or the history of vaccinology, to kind of understand the great progress that we've made. And no doubt we have made great progress, and we're making increasing progress in getting the vaccines out to people. More than 115 million people in the United States Now having received a single dose. President Biden addressed this last night in his brief speech. Very importantly, 12.3% of the US population is now fully vaccinated. 15.9% of those older than 18 years of age. We're getting out 2.5 million doses per day, which is a nice level. We could always do more, but that's really taken us far. And I think very importantly, as President Biden pointed out last night, 66, so 2/3 of those older than 65 have received a single dose of the vaccine, and more than a third, 38.6% of those older than 65 years of age are fully vaccinated. And as President Biden said last night, that age group has made up more than 80% of those who've died of COVID-19 over the past year or so. So really important that we've reached that priority group. However, as Jennifer said, we're not out of the woods yet. It's still a race of vaccines against the variants, and I'm just going to very briefly give some highlights. There's so much going on, but I'm going to use my simple framework of the 4Ds of a successful mass vaccination campaigns: doses, delivery, demand, and data. On the doses side, we've heard from President Biden that we expect to have sufficient number of doses for all Americans older than 18 years of age by the end of May. Our challenge now has been, delivering those. So we're in this period where demand exceeds the number of doses. I imagine in a couple of months we're going to be transitioning to the inverse of that, where we have more doses and we need to work on the demand. But the delivery side has been challenging. But as you said, Lainie, we're seeing increasing number of states really expand their eligibility criteria. Now almost we're getting up to close to 24 states having either opened eligibility to all adults or planning to do so by that May 1st deadline that the President Biden outlined. Here in Maryland, we're expecting that opening of eligibility may happen on April 27th. In terms of eligibility, there's also progress made in studying and evaluating these vaccines in younger and younger children. Some of the big news of the past week has been that Moderna announced a combination phase 2, phase 3 trial that expects to enroll over 6,000 children between the ages of 6 months and 12 years. So there have been ongoing studies. There are ongoing studies of children 12 years to either 16 or 18 years of age for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. We're going to expect to see those results in the coming months. The FDA has asked that we have 6 months of follow-up for the pediatric studies. And with this younger age group, what we're going to see is they're going to start out with looking at some different doses. Obviously, children are not just small adults, and we're going to need to see whether smaller doses will be as immunogenic in those children as they are in older children and adults. So encouraging news in terms of the development and evaluation of vaccines for younger children. We heard from President Biden last night that there is, continued expansion of the mass vaccination sites and outreach vaccinations. And increasing in the numbers of vaccinators. But we're also still facing a lot of disparities here in the United States in terms of who's getting vaccinated. And so the CDC this past week issued a report on the first 2.5 months of the vaccination program that's still showing that counties with high social vulnerability are vaccinating at lower rates. So we really need to address those disparities. On the demand side, Lainie, the Biden administration has this $1.5 billion effort to get out public health messaging around the vaccine. But we heard there's been a lot of news over the past week that a new NPR PBS Marist poll showing that 41% of Republicans and 34% of independents would refuse or to get vaccinated. And so we're seeing this differences in vaccine acceptability by political affiliation. Only 11% of Democrats would refuse the vaccination, and the highest group was among Republican men. Close to 50% said they would not get vaccinated. So a lot of work needs to be done in reaching those people in terms of convincing them and correcting misinformation and disinformation around the vaccinations. On the data side, just some recent news. There's a large international effort to provide standardized digital vaccination credentials through phone apps, and we heard that Walmart and Sam Clubs is going to participate in this, and they're delivering a lot of vaccines now in the United States. Lastly, I just want to end up on the global scene because there's been a lot of news around this. And as we've talked before, Lainie, the U.S. does need to really be a key player in getting vaccines to all countries around the world. This is a global pandemic. We heard that the U.S. will be loaning 2.5 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine to Mexico, 1.5 million doses to Canada. But the big news, I think, of the past week, and I'll just end on this, has been the story around the AstraZeneca vaccine in the European region. And many of our listeners know that a number of countries in the European region suspended the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine because of case reports of increased clotting disorders potentially or bleeding disorders that concerned enough countries to actually pause the vaccine. Now, the European Medicines Agency issued a report yesterday saying the vaccine was safe and effective, but they will change the labeling of the vaccine, indicating that a warning for physicians to look out for rare abnormal bleeding in the brain. But my concern, Lainie, is that even though many countries are now after this issue safety investigation by the European Medicines Agency, as they try to pivot back and reopen up vaccination and providing the AstraZeneca vaccine to their populations, which are sorely needed because of the wave of cases that we're now seeing again in Europe, that a lot of damage has been done in terms of the confidence and trust in this vaccine. And so this could not have come at a worse time. And I just hope that there's continued transparent messaging about the investigations and that those countries can rebuild the trust and vaccinate their populations.
Thanks, Bill. Wow, you were not kidding when you said it was a busy week in vaccines. And thank you also for the public health history at the beginning. I'm going to turn now to the questions that have been submitted by our audience for our experts today. And no surprise, Bill, we have several vaccination-related questions, so I'm going to start with you. For those who know that they've already had COVID, do they really need to get vaccinated now?
Yes. So the CDC guidelines are that individuals who've had COVID, should receive 2 doses of the vaccine, and this is because the immune response to the natural infection is highly variable, but we know that the vaccines are very highly protective. So it's trading the uncertainty about the level and duration of protection following natural infection with the really good evidence we have on the protective efficacy of the vaccines. Now, there has been emerging evidence that people who've had confirmed prior infection with COVID-19, if they develop, I'll say, strong immune responses after a single dose. And so I anticipate that in the future, we may see recommendations that people who've had COVID-19 only need a single dose of the vaccine to kind of boost that immune response. But right now, the recommendations are 2 doses for those with COVID-19.
Thanks, Bill. And when do you think we're likely to hear about the AstraZeneca vaccine in the US?
Yes. So just the background to that is that the AstraZeneca vaccine has been studied in the United States in a large phase 3 trial, just like we saw with the Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson vaccines. I anticipate that the AstraZeneca will apply for an emergency use authorization to the Food and Drug Administration. Sometime in April is when we're expecting. Now, obviously, the FDA is going to look very carefully at that phase 3 trial to see if there's any signal of either blood clots or bleeding in vaccine recipients in that trial. I don't expect that will be the case, certainly. But they'll also, I'm sure, be looking at what happened in Europe and what drove the concerns and what the evidence is there as well. But the short answer is probably in April sometime we'll be seeing that application from AstraZeneca to the Food and Drug Administration.
Thanks, Bill. Jennifer, turning to you, we're getting several questions about the news about schools and distancing. So first question is, given this new information from CDC that with masking, students should maintain a distance of 3 feet as opposed to the previous recommendation, which was 6 feet. So there's the context. Is this change happening to accommodate schools and their conditions, or is it happening because there's new data that's changed what CDC is thinking here?
Well, so I think what is predominantly driving it is that the data supporting the use of 6 versus 3 feet hasn't been there. And in fact, there was a recent study that showed no noticeable difference in school transmission, depending on whether 3 feet or 6 feet of distance were maintained. Similarly, other studies have shown that really when we're talking about safety protocols, it's a layered approach, and that perhaps other layers are more important, such as masking and ventilation, opening windows, cohorting, et cetera. So the problem has been that one piece, that physical distance, there was never really great evidence to suggest that 6 feet was a magic number by any means. It was just, a suggestion, but I think we have learned more about how the virus spread to maybe call that number into question. Certainly using 6 feet had always put the United States out of alignment with the WHO that had recommended a meter of distance, which for those who don't know metric, it's closer to 3 feet. So, I think we're just coming better into alignment with the science. That said, we do know that maintaining 6 feet of distance has been particularly difficult for school systems to be able to return children to the classroom within the confines of their school buildings. There simply hadn't been enough space to bring all of the students back, and that's why you see either continued virtual learning or hybrid learning in order to space students out a bit. We've also seen now evidence coming back about the insufficiency of virtual and hybrid learning models, that, with students spending so much time on the computer, reduced physical activity and other mental health and wellness concerns. So, I think there really was an urgency around looking at this physical distancing requirement and whether it was truly supported by the science or whether it was an unnecessary barrier. And I think there's just been mounting evidence that it was more in the latter category of barrier.
Thanks, Jennifer. And then a follow-up question to that is, given this new guidance, how will that be squared with contact tracing guidance? Will contact tracing continue to use the 6 feet metric?
Yeah, so that has also been an area not without contention, so much so that we heard at some point school districts were having students get up and move, every 14.9 minutes, so that if there was an exposure in class, the exposure wouldn't count as triggering contact tracing, because the guideposts for contact tracing was within 6 feet of distance within 15 minutes. But, listen, contact tracing is an art, isn't as much of a science. And so the idea will still be, it's important to assess who children have had contact with. Now, the CDC guidance does also talk about the importance of cohorting, and that's an important safety measure, which is reducing the number of people any one student or staff member has contact with throughout the day. That remains important. And if that absolutely can't be done in the older school districts, that perhaps more distance is necessary. However, in my view, I think it's contact cohorting probably supersedes the distancing requirement, because just the number of contacts you have throughout the day, the more probabilities that one of those individuals will be infected. So contact tracing should proceed, but and whether a student comes within 3 feet or 6 feet of somebody for a meaningful amount of time, that's still, I think, considered a contact.
Thanks, Jennifer. Bill, turning to you for more vaccine questions. What do we know about the potential for a booster with the J&J vaccine, given that it was studied as a one-shot vaccination?
Yes, this is an important question. And so that is being studied currently in the United States, a 2-dose J&J regimen. I imagine what we'll see is that second dose increases the antibody levels and may provide higher protective efficacy, particularly against the more mild or moderate disease. Again, I want to highlight that single dose of the J&J vaccine is highly protective against severe disease, hospitalizations, and death, and that's why it's being given that way. But I think it'll probably be in the coming months where we'll see the results of the 2-dose J&J vaccine, and that will help guide the FDA and the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices on whether to recommend a second dose for the J&J vaccine.
Thanks, Bill. And we're also getting several questions today about where we are in terms of the 3 vaccines with the EUA in the US, so Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J, relative to the variants that are out there. Could you talk about that a bit, please?
Yes, this is a really important issue, and obviously, just to highlight that there are kind of these well-characterized, well-known variants of concern. I think particularly the B351 variant that was first identified in South Africa, but there are many other obviously variants and variants of concern. So what we know best about those 3 vaccines, first with the J&J vaccine, that was actually studied in South Africa when that variant of concern was circulating. So we really have the best evidence on that vaccine and how it performs. And there was reduced efficacy in South Africa compared to the efficacy that we saw in the United States with that vaccine. Something like 72% efficacy in the United States, on the order of 64% in South Africa. But that vaccine, the J&J vaccine, was still highly protective against severe disease in the South, with that South African variant circulating. We know a little bit less about the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines because they weren't studied when those variants of concern were circulating. What we have there are really in vitro, what we call in vitro or laboratory data that shows that the level of neutralizing antibodies is lower against those variants, but still thought to be protective. And we're continuing to gather new data on the efficacy of those vaccines as new variants emerge or as variants increase in the United States. The variant that's increasing in the United States is the one first identified in the United Kingdom, and that the vaccines seem to be highly protective against.
Thanks, Bill. Jennifer, question for you. We're actually getting several questions about this. So we are now seeing in other parts of the world some surges in cases. Some people are calling it a 3rd wave. How concerned are you about that pattern starting to show up in parts of the United States?
It remains a possibility for certain. I am a little bit more optimistic that we won't see it for 2 reasons. One is bad and one is good. The bad one is we've had a 3rd surge of cases, and we have had a larger epidemic than a number of the countries that are now seeing this very large rise in cases. So that unfortunately means there's probably a higher level of natural immunity in the US, which is not a success by any means. But the other reason is that we are more quickly rolling out vaccines in a number of those countries. And that's why, to Bill's point about the urgency around the pausing of vaccinations right now, there really is an urgency around that. So, but seeing case increases in any part of the United States, as we are seeing in a few places, is of course worrisome. And we are by no means guaranteed to be spared from another surge in cases. I don't think any of us want to have that kind of setback now when we're so close to the finish line. So it remains important that we stay the course over the next few months. And I am hoping as we continue to do that and continue to roll out vaccines that we can avoid what a number of countries in Europe are seeing right now.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. And we're nearly at 12:30, so you have the last word today. I'd like to thank Jennifer Nuzzo and Bill Moss for joining me today and give a big thank you to everyone in our audience and especially to those who submitted questions for our experts to answer. As always, this briefing will be archived and available on coronavirus.jhu.edu. As a reminder, we'll continue to offer these regular 30-minute briefings on Fridays at 12 p.m. And in each briefing, we'll focus on what you need to know right now about the COVID-19 pandemic, and we'll have live Q&A with our experts. I'll look forward to seeing you at our next 30-minute briefing. Until then, thanks and stay safe.